Should be there in just a second. Okay, we're live.
Okay, so let's get started. I'm Dita Seed. I'm with the Center for Biological Diversity. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our live stream press conference on our Rio Tinto letter. Today, we'll hear from 8 community leaders who, along with 28 environmental and community organizations and over 600 Utahns, are calling on mining giant Rio Tinto to do the right thing and protect the lands it owns in the Utah Inland Port area instead of developing them. Our call for action comes in the form of a letter addressed to Rio Tinto CEO Jean-Sébastien Jacques. I'll put a link to the letter in the chat box in a moment. It's also on the Stop the Polluting Port Coalition's website, stopthepollutingport.org. The letter was researched and written by a team of community volunteers, some of whom will be speaking today, but I just want to name the members of the team since they did a lot of work on this letter. The members of the team are Nancy McHugh, Ann O'Connell, Dorothy Owen, Richard Holman, Larry Dean, Jill Merritt, Kathy Adams, Liz Burley, James King, David Shear, Heather Dove, Katie Pappas, Brian Minch, Tina Rohr, Lisa Manuel, Stan Holmes, Joan Gregory, Jan Ellen Burton, Sarah Buck, and Lee Stanhope. The letter outlines the harm Rio Tinto has already inflicted on our communities and describes the harm that will be inflicted if the proposed Utah Inland Port is built. So we're up to 657 signatures from the community today. And again, we're asking Rio Tinto to do the right thing and protect this area from development. Our speakers will now describe the details. So first we'll hear from architect and planner David Shear, who will describe the harm Rio Tinto has already done and what we can expect from the proposed port development.
Thanks, Dita. Mining and refining copper and other metals produces toxic waste products. Since the company now known as Rio Tinto Kennecott began these operations in the Salt Lake Valley over a century ago, residents have implicitly accepted a Faustian bargain, trading jobs and economic growth in exchange for massive environmental degradation. For most of this time, the extent of this environmental damage went unrecognized and unregulated. Now we're beginning to understand how harmful this environmental damage can be to public health and how human health is intertwined with the environment as a whole. In recognition of this, federal law now requires mining companies and others to take steps to mitigate the environmental damage they cause. This can take several forms, from cleaning up toxic spills to dedicating unspoiled land to offset permanently degraded areas. In the case of Rio Tinto Kennecott, this damage is enormous. The total damage done to the environment of the Salt Lake Valley by the company and its predecessors is unknowable. During just the past 25 years, the company has been the subject of numerous legal actions to mitigate documented pollution events. To cite a few: draining toxic amounts of selenium known to be harmful to birds' reproduction into the Great Salt Lake, creating a groundwater plume of selenium and arsenic emanating from the company's northern Ochre Mountains operations, creating an acidic groundwater plume that contaminated the drinking water of thousands of residents of South Jordan, releasing toxic tailings from a facility in southwest Salt Lake County on 3 separate occasions, and releasing toxic tailings from its Barney's Canyon mine on 3 separate occasions. The company has shown itself to be less than trustworthy in protecting our communities, as when its executives covered up known defects in its tailing impoundments that threatened to inundate whole neighborhoods in toxic sludge. Now, Rio Tinto Kennecott plans to use taxpayer dollars to develop its extensive holdings in the northwest quadrant as part of an inland port. The company once planned to preserve this land as open space in partial fulfillment of its mitigation responsibilities. Under its current plan, the land will become the site of millions of square feet of warehouses. This will further pollute groundwater and the Great Salt Lake and worsen our already unhealthy air quality by creating as many as 69,000 additional truck trips and 152,000 additional car trips every day. The company, which earned $7 billion in profits last year, does not need to further enrich itself at the expense of the environment. It certainly doesn't need millions of taxpayer dollars to help it do so. Rio Tinto Kennecott has profited enormously from its operations in the Salt Lake Valley at enormous expense to the environment we all share. This letter asks the company to live up to its responsibilities and once again dedicate this land to be preserved in its natural state as partial mitigation of the harm it has caused. Nothing can undo the damage Rio Tinto Kennecott has done to our air and water, but at least it can avoid causing even more harm in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Next, we're going to hear from Heather Dove, president of Great Salt Lake Audubon.
Good morning. The inland port is a reprehensible project that will desecrate and destroy up to 16,000 acres of critical wildlife habitat. Rio Tinto is one of the largest players in this project and therefore can be considered the enablers of this destruction. This is a fact that much of the public is unaware of, as Rio Tinto has chosen to keep a relatively low public profile regarding their role. These 16,000 acres are an integral part of the essential habitat of the South Shore of Great Salt Lake. They're a critical component of both the Pacific and Central flyways. They're the gateway to Great Salt Lake for the 10 million migrating and resident birds that utilize it every year. There are ephemeral, seasonally watered wetlands, mudflats, and playas contained in this area, but the most important and most dominant habitat within the inland port is uplands. Jack Hedge, executive director of the Utah Inland Port Authority, Rio Tinto's partner in this crime against the environment, has been heard to say publicly that it's a fallacy that the lands within the port are bird habitat, that only the lands north of the inland port are bird habitat. Well, I'm here to say that statement is categorically false. As I'm speaking, you can see photos of the many species that inhabit the upland terrain contained within the inland port. Many of these birds hunt and forage in this area. Many others nest here. I've not even included most of the water birds and shorebirds that use the ephemeral wetlands and seasonally watered playas that are present throughout the 16,000 acres. These birds you see today are just the birds that utilize the land filled with salt and alkali-tolerant grasses, forbs, and shrubs. We should note that not one of these birds was mentioned in the port's strategic business plan that was released in May, nor were the other creatures that inhabit this land, like the pronghorn antelope and the coyotes. Mention was made, however, that the Canada lynx, a high-altitude mammal that's found primarily north of the US-Canadian border, has not been seen within the jurisdictional lands of the port for many decades. All these birds and other creatures I'm showing you today will lose their home and habitat that nourishes and sustains them. This development will surely further contribute to the massive loss of birds in North America, 3 billion already since 1970. Rio Tinto is a highly profitable multinational company that is not even headquartered in the United States or North America. It has 21 huge mining and extraction operations worldwide. It has a lengthy record of destroying priceless natural, cultural, and prehistoric resources. This record includes a 100-year-plus history in this valley, filled with ongoing devastating destruction and pollution. Now they're set to destroy some of our last remaining wild lands and open space south of the lake. This should not and cannot happen. We call on Rio Tinto to start righting the 100+ years of wrongs. We call on Rio Tinto to cancel this involvement in this reprehensible project. We call on Rio Tinto to put these lands into conservation and protect our environment by saving our last vestiges of nature in this valley. Thanks.
Thank you, Heather. Next, we're going to hear from Dr. Brian Minch, Board President of Utah Physicians for a Healthy Environment. as air quality will deteriorate and greenhouse gas emissions will increase if the inland port is built. Dr. Minch will tell us more about this.
Thank you, Dita, and good morning to members of the public and members of the media. Utah Physicians for a Healthy Environment is an organization that includes about 450 physicians and 3,000 members of the lay public. And I am speaking on their behalf today. Since 1906, the Bingham Canyon mine, run by Kennecott and then Rio Tinto, has produced large quantities of a variety of metals at tremendous profit with the employ of thousands of Utahns. But the excavation, earth moving, ore transport, coal-fired power plant, and smelting process has also created an ongoing pollution nightmare, contaminating the air, water, and soil of the most heavily populated part of the state. This is the only place in the world where a mine this size is right next to a major city. The Bingham Canyon mine is the second largest source of toxic releases in the United States, according to our federal government. Likewise, Salt Lake County is perennially the second worst in the nation for the volume of toxins released into the environment, most of which comes from the Rio Tinto mine. Most of these millions of pounds of toxins are the consequences of earth moving and excavation. In addition, from the thousands of pounds of lead emitted from the smelter stack every year, to the tons of fugitive dust, particulate matter, toxic chemicals, and nitrogen oxides emitted from their diesel equipment and other mining operations, Rio Tinto has harmed the health of our densely populated community in many different ways. These include exposing our children to neurotoxins and precipitating virtually all the diseases known to come from smoking cigarettes. Extrapolating from worldwide research, Utah Physicians for a Healthy Environment estimates that over the course of nearly 120 years, Rio Tinto Kennecott has polluted the Salt Lake Valley, leading to the premature deaths of tens of thousands of people and countless heart attacks, strokes, cancers, and hospitalizations. Among other things, the inland port is being planned as a gateway to increasing dirty energy extracted from the state of Utah, the exact opposite of the global imperative to dramatically decrease our greenhouse gases to protect us from an irreversible climate crisis and global public health disaster. It is time for Rio Tinto to start making amends. Our request they make their inland port property a conservation easement is reasonable and fair. On the other hand, for Rio Tinto to pursue yet a new way to profit from exploiting the residents of Utah is unreasonable, unfair, and in fact, unconscionable. On behalf of thousands of people, we call on Rio Tinto to finally do the right thing. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. The impacts of the proposed port will be felt first by some of our most vulnerable communities. Moder Tadise, a community activist working with other young people in the Sierra Club, will tell us about how Rio Tinto's inland port development will harm our communities.
Thank you. Time and time again, Salt Lake City's west side has been treated as a literal dump site for the state's air pollution issues. From its proximity to the valley's freeways, refineries, medical waste incinerators, and international airport, burdening the health of a historically low-income and minority community. For decades, residents of these communities have been disproportionately at risk for respiratory diseases, cardiac diseases, and birth defects. Yet with all of the burdens that these marginalized communities, including my community, face, they are repeatedly neglected in terms of protection from the government that should be serving to protect them. This has been proven through the legislative budget cuts that forced clinic closures in Salt Lake's most vulnerable communities in the midst of a pandemic, while funding corporations that are polluting those same communities. It will be proven again if Utah allows Rio Tinto to proceed with the inland port project in a region riddled with enough environmental issues already. At this point, adding the inland port is not only inconsiderate for the future, it is inconsiderate for the present. We have absolutely no more room in the environmental and health degradation party that major corporations have been recklessly throwing in our backyards for decades. This party needs to be shut down now. Reversing and preventing major polluters from settling in Salt Lake's west side is the only hope for its residents. With the cost of living skyrocketing across the state, many cannot afford to uproot their lives in search of health and environmental tranquility, and they should not have to. Instead, corporations like Rio Tinto should play their part in making the region as sustainable and hospitable as possible. In this case, it means leaving the land alone. Thank you.
Thank you. And now from more of a community perspective, we'll hear from Richard Holman, who's chair of the West Side Coalition.
Good morning. I'm Richard Holman, chair of the West Side Coalition. The West Side Coalition represents the 6 westernmost communities of Salt Lake City. These communities are comprised of the most culturally diverse populations in the entire valley. These same communities have for decades been subjected to exorbitant vehicle exhaust emissions, poor overall air quality, as well as other environmental pollutants caused by local, industrial, and transportation development. These impacts come from 3 oil refineries, an international airport, a municipal water treatment system, 3 intersecting interstate highways, expansive 24/7 rail yard operations, and the dust and debris generated by local quarry operations. The Utah Inland Port area, including the land holdings of Rio Tinto, will contribute at build out an order of magnitude greater air pollution than many of the other sources mentioned combined. This looming impact will be generated by thousands, if not tens of thousands, of additional vehicles entering and leaving the port every day and night. The development being proposed and the role that Rio Tinto plays in this development will compromise historic communities and their culture, and will unjustly expose our disparate and primarily minority populations and their children to ever increasing health risks, and will burden the existing roadways and infrastructure beyond rated capacity. In addition, this development will create further local and highway traffic congestion, increase air particulate from diesel idling, and create road damage requiring extensive taxpayer investment to repair. We need Rio Tinto's consideration at this point to preserve the future of our residents and their neighborhoods. We implore Rio Tinto not to pursue the Utah Inland Port development any further. We ask that Rio Tinto side with our communities and help to sustain their long-established cultures here in Salt Lake City. We ask that Rio Tinto abandon this effort that is virtually insignificant in the scheme of their vast worldwide holdings, and instead, let this land lie fallow and garner the appreciation of so many of us here that can no longer defend against nor endure the unbridled development impacting our home. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. Another serious area of concern is that the land proposed for port development contains unsurveyed cultural resources in the form of ancient burial sites and villages of Indigenous people. Here to talk about this really important issue, we have Davina Smith, who is CEO of Hasea Native Initiatives, LLC, and Ron Rood, who is a former assistant state archaeologist and president of the Utah State Archaeological Society.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Davina Smith. I am from the Diné Nation, also known as the Navajo Nation. Today, I'd like to talk about ancestral lands. As Rio Tinto knows how important, hopefully, how important ancestral lands are, as I became aware that in Australia, they had destroyed a 46,000-year-old ancestral site. Ancestral sites for us is our homelands. We are still here. We remain here in the United States. There are over 570 tribes here in the United States. And in 1851, Congress passed an act which is called the Indian Appropriation Act. And that act was basically to force us to relocate to what's called today as reservations. These ancestral sites are still and will continue to be our homelands. So here in this area, in the valley, in Salt Lake Valley, the homelands to those sites are to the Goshute, to the Utes. And so I am here today to say that I will do everything I can within protecting those sites. I am an advocate for Bears Ears National Monument. That is my homeland. That is connected to me. I'm an advocate for Grand Staircase Escalante. That's the homeland to the Paiute Nation. So with that being said, I do have an archaeologist in which we will be working extensively to make sure that those areas are protected for the Goshute Nation. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Good morning. The footprint of the proposed inland port has been home to indigenous Native American people for at least 12,000 years. Archaeological sites, including small specialized food procurement locations and large village sites, are known to exist in this area. And no doubt there are additional sites yet discovered. Some examples of known sites in the area include the famous 1,000-year-old Fremont Village site discovered beneath the streets of Salt Lake during the construction of the Trax line. Another at the Salt Lake Airport, known as the Airport Site, has archaeological components dating back more than 6,000 years and evidence of an extensive occupation at around 1,000 years ago. Yet another site, known as the Warm Springs Site, has archaeological components dating back to 7,000 years with major episodes of use during the Fremont times about 1,000 years ago and the late prehistoric, only 500 years ago. Human burials were discovered at every one of these above mentioned sites. There is no way to predict the location of ancient human burials, as indigenous peoples in Utah treated their dead in a variety of ways. There is no single identifiable burial ground, and ancient burial locations could be anywhere, literally anywhere within the footprint of this massive undertaking. Archaeological sites in this part of Utah are often completely invisible from the ground surface, being buried under sediments. They are in fact libraries that hold significant information about the past, the human past and the environmental past. No doubt, a project of this size and scope has the likely potential to destroy archaeological sites, perhaps as easily with a single scrape of a dozer or a single scoop of a track hoe. Most importantly, as Davina has just mentioned, these sites are very important and considered sacred by many indigenous groups. Not only are there pre-contact or prehistoric indigenous people sites in this area, there are also Euro-American sites, historic sites that help tell the story of the early Euro-American settlement of this valley. The recent destruction of a 46,000-year-old archaeological site in Australia at the hand of Rio Tinto was a terrible event. The wanton destruction of our shared cultural heritage is unacceptable, and we are sure Rio Tinto wants no additional, quote, misunderstandings when it comes to the destruction of indigenous or Euro-American historic sites. Thank you.
Thank you, Ron and Davina. Next, we're going to hear from Carly Farrow. She is the Executive Director of the Utah chapter of the Sierra Club.
Good morning. I'm here today speaking on behalf of our more than 30,000 members and supporters throughout the state of Utah. People are hurting, and the choices we make today will determine the future for all Utahns. For too long, our air, water, lands, and most importantly, public health have endured vandalism of heightened pollution and toxic waste. Here's an opportunity. Here is a chance to perpetually protect and provide for a healthy, livable future for Utah. The inland port was hastily approved by the legislature 2 years ago without comprehensive public support and continues to face mounting opposition. As you heard here today, The inland port development threatens cultural sites and resources, air quality, public health. It would destroy wetlands important for enhancing water quality, sustaining stream flows, and bird habitats. Its impacts outweighing benefits. Though this is not the future we have to choose. An alternate future is readily accessible, and it all depends on the choices we make in these moments. So Rio Tinto, will you choose to leverage your privilege and power to protect Utah? You're already facing divestment and backlash for actions to slow climate progress and the desecration of cultural sites. Still, we each have a stake in the future, and here's an opportunity to be on the right side of history in Utah. Together, we must take action to advance solutions to the greatest risks humanity faces, not exacerbate them. The environment and public remain vulnerable to the crises of the COVID-19 pandemic and climate change. We need leaders and businesses that stand for the protection of the communities they extract from and stand with the people to protect the ecosystems and the services they provide that are essential to humanity. That means, Rio, protecting your land holdings for the development of the inland port. Thank you.
Thank you, Carly. That concludes our presentation. Are there any questions?
Hi, Dita. This is Taylor from the Tribune. I have two questions. The first is, do you know how many acres Rio Tinto has in the inland port jurisdiction, or how much land holding they have?
As of the issuance of the Utah Inland Port Strategic Business Plan, it was stated in there that they have about 1,600 acres. They are in partnership with another major property owner out there, the Colmena Group, also known as Northwest Quadrant LLC. And so they may own more, or they may have sold some to Northwest Quadrant LLC, but about 1,600 acres within the inland port proper. And then outside of the boundary of the inland port, they own land there as well.
I'm also wondering, you guys have spent a lot of time talking to the Inland Port Board, talking to Jack Hedge, some of those decision makers. Does this represent a shift in tactics now starting to speak to some of these landowners in the port area?
Yes, it was really clear from the strategic business plan that the Utah Inland Port Authority is disavowing any ability to control development almost. And our coalition has noticed that Rio Tinto has really escaped public attention. And so, this team of people that wrote the letter really want to engage Rio Tinto, since they are property owners and the decisions that they make will impact whether we have a polluted valley and destroyed bird habitat or not. Like, Rio Tinto can do the right thing here and protect this land. And yes, this is a different approach. We've found speaking to the Utah Inland Port Authority board is like banging our head against a wall.
Thanks, Dita.
Any other questions? Okay, hearing none. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us. And the letter to Rio Tinto is available on the Stop the Polluting Port website, stopthepollutingport.org, and you scroll down and you can look at a PDF of the letter. We've sent it to the CEO of Rio Tinto, Jean-Sébastien Jacques, and we've CC'd the City Council and Mayor Mendenhall, because they are also in a development agreement with Rio Tinto. So the city has a role here as well. So thank you, everybody. And this was our first virtual press conference. Thank you to all the participants and all the people who worked so hard on putting this letter together. And thank you to our speakers. Take care.